Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webcast where public sector agencies are headed, how IT vendors can capture opportunity, highlighting the results from our recent public sector SourceIT study. My name is Allison Crawford, Senior Marketing Manager here at TBR, and I will be your host for today's session. Technology Business Research's focus is to provide business research to accelerate our clients' success, and this webinar is a part of these ongoing efforts to find new ways to support you and your business, helping you get the most out of your research investment. In TBR's new research track, SourceIT, we help our clients identify opportunity by highlighting the business and IT strategy drivers and demands in specific market segments, targeting IT purchasing decision makers by explaining purchasing scenarios and identifying where in the business or IT organizations decisions to purchase will be made. This insight will help clients understand how the changing population demographics, constrained budgets, and new regulations and mandates are influencing public sector purchases and how agencies are responding by investing in business applications, systems management, and productivity tools. Through this research, our goal is consistent: to provide actionable insight into the market and competitive strategies that translates into advantage for our clients. In the next 30 minutes, software practice Stuart Williams will delve into the trends driving the results featured in this recently released study, followed by Q&A of these trends and how they will affect you. Before I pass this over to Stuart, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Stuart will address them at the end of the presentation, or you can request an inquiry call if you have additional questions. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and I'll be sharing all these social media links with you again at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce Stuart Williams. Stuart leads TBR's software and cloud practice and has pioneered this revolutionary work into mapping the opportunity playbook in IT purchasing. His presentation today is a summary of the key points found in the full 100-plus page report, which double-clicks into workload categories to specific key workloads, key project case studies, and deeper buyer analysis. And with that, let me hand this over to Stuart.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this overview of our SourceIT public sector report, where public sector agencies are headed, and how our IT vendor clients can grow business against this opportunity. The presentation I'm going to make today, as Allison noted, is an executive summary and key findings of the full SourceIT report, and we're excited to bring this to market because it provides a great deal of detail that looks into the behavior, the investment, follow the money strategy, and key drivers and purchasers within the large public sector agencies and entities in North America. TBR's SourceIT research is a customer segmentation research program that pulls together all of our clients' requirements to provide foundational reports segment by segment. And we'll be following up this report presentation today with a series of 3 other webinars on telecommunications and service providers, commercial and consumer, banking and financial services, healthcare, payers, and providers. So those are 4 that are coming out. Please look for those invitations. If you're interested, we can follow up with you. So where's the public sector headed in North America? Among the large agencies across the U.S. and Canada, they're facing huge challenges with changing demographics of the population that they serve. There's huge constraint in budgets, not just in the tax revenue that can be spent, but also in rescissions that are pulling back the amount of money being distributed at federal and state levels. And overall, they're dealing with new regulations and mandates that help serve the need of the population or regulate business or industry. So the key service component for the IT department is that they're aligning to help improve what we call the mission support. Every agency, every public entity, could be a public health care organization, could be an education institution, could be corrections, it could be a large municipality that is included in this category of large public sector entity research, are faced with these constraints. And the quote here is really pertinent because it says, in the current atmosphere of dwindling budgets and increased service expectations, we're trying for improved services, better resolutions with greater transparency and accountability at all levels of the workflow. So when we talked to the participants in this segment, we heard this story over and over again. So as well as them providing us information about their IT spend, where their budgets are going across a whole series of workloads, as well as which vendors are top of mind for them in their discretionary purchases, we heard these stories about why they're having to make these changes and then how they're realigning their IT environments and services to make their agencies work better. Overall, we saw a vendor addressable spend of $38.1 billion coming up in 2014. That was a very minor increase year over year, about 1.1%. So the vendor addressable spend is significant in this large segment. It's shaped by these driving forces, and we're going to go, let's double click now into some of the key elements that you need to be aware of to capitalize on the opportunity. So with these headwinds shaping the response of the IT department, the vendor community can win business by helping these public sector entities modernize for mission effectiveness. And notice I'm not just saying IT modernize. Really, you have to have conversations with both the line of business, the agency and department directors, as well as the IT department to bring them together around mission effectiveness, to better understand what is it that they need to reconfigure either up through the data center, in their applications to be modernized, or in the delivery and consumption of those services, either by the frontline people helping the end users, the public, or through directly to the public themselves. And IT is really involved in driving that long-term revolution. We'll double-click into that as we go into this part of the presentation. So what is it that IT wants to take advantage of? It's cloud, mobile, big data, and web technology that's being adopted broadly across the business and consumer landscapes that's reshaping how public sector entities are both serving the end customer and achieving their mission. This quote here from an IT manager, this is actually in a large municipality located in Florida, said, "Technology presents many opportunities for us to deliver better services to our citizens. More and more, people want an immediate, specific, casual, and personalized service experience. People are looking to technology to find that experience. We, as a government entity, are left trying to understand the demands of a Web 2.0. So by that, we asked more questions there, and it obviously fell into more of a cloud delivery piece for this particular person. But you can see, the IT people are aware, they're heads up, and they're aware of where this is going, but they're facing these challenges. The economic recovery in a lot of parts of the country, and certainly coming down from the federal level, means there are constrained resources available. The demographic changes that for the public that are being served in the U.S. and Canada are significant. We have populations that are aging into retirement. We have a larger shift between different ethnic groups in this country. We have location shifts as people move into urban areas. We also have migration related to the services population, the way that people are consuming those services. And the overall security environment is increasing when we bring in the regulatory and security environments, as evidenced by some of the questions raised by Edward Snowden and NSA and those elements. The public wants to know what's happening with their information. At the same time, we see the moves for data center consolidation and cloud adoption, helping to move for the need for internal efficiency and effectiveness. So the public sectors are responding to these changes. They're not going to increase their personnel footprint, so they need to look for new ways to become more effective and efficient and deliver against these requirements. Cost containment is key. Security is a key table stakes in this communication. So we find that the public sector entities really taking all of these factors into account aren't increasing their spend so much, but reallocating where they're going, and we'll show some of that in an average budget a little bit later in this presentation, and really focusing, because they tend to lag the rest of the market, on the data center reinvention, pulling the data centers together, and making infrastructure, systems management, and professional services contracts to help them make that move. I love this quote here on the page. It says, "The current infrastructure is unnecessarily complex and should be simplified to reduce costs and assist the sustainability of IT operations. IT is somewhat fragmented into multiple databases, standalone applications, and technology products. We are doing these projects to have a more integrated approach and IT governance within the municipality that should be centralized and empowered to enforce policy." So, this is part of the ongoing roadmaps that we see. Again, here's another quote. "Priorities were set last year, and most project timelines are due for completion within 18 months. So we're just now starting to review for 2015 and beyond." The data in this table here represents a consolidation of the priorities that our respondents indicated across a whole series of sub-workloads inside each one of these workload categories. So industry applications include things like the mission applications for serving each individual agency. Business applications are those horizontal, finance and accounting, customer relationship. BI and analytics is pretty clear. Productivity is clear. Systems management represents those elements that are needed to operate, manage, secure, and govern the other systems. So when you compare this prioritization to the actual budget categories, we're going to show that to you in a little bit, you'll notice that the applications here are kind of overweighted in terms of the priority. So this really talks to that emphasis on fulfilling the mission and optimizing the way that the agencies work as a business entity as well as a service entity. We also wanted to understand a little bit about how the opportunity gets split up and what the average budget size is among the public sector entities that we are surveyed in this. So North America, US and Canada, entities with between 1,000 and under 10,000 employees represented about 95% of the roughly 3,500 entities that are in this segment. When we asked them about what their IT budget is, in 2014, the average there was $2.5 million with a small increase this year. The small number, the 5%, it represents much larger entities with 10,000 or more employees with an average IT budget, the median IT budget of $22 million. There's a few agencies that are just astronomically budgeted. So when we take this whole range of public sector entities into account, we do get an average budget across the whole across the whole segment of $14.3 million in this public sector. Obviously, there are, as I mentioned, a few very large agencies that have their IT budgets in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, but the average budgets here are pegged at a little bit south of that. But the key story here is that this IT spending agenda is shaped by those largest units. They're the ones that are in connection with NIST, that work in cooperation with the Code of Federal Regulations, the federal agency standards. They set the IT standards. They're working on the adoption of these. And the purchases and the adoption of those standards have fallout down the tiers of the agencies, down into the large, smaller but still large federal agencies, the large state and large local public sector agencies. So let's begin to take this apart and look a little bit more deeply at specific areas where public sector entities are investing. So we've talked about the need for them to address and make the mission more effective, the need for cost efficiency. So the three areas where they're really, when we look across all of the data, what are they doing? It's application modernization, data center consolidation, and cloud-based applications. So we talked about how in our research methodology we go out and we survey and have interviews with the respondents who qualify for this customer segment. When we begin to scale that data up, we find that the total IT spending within the public sector is roughly $49.1 billion. Now, there's some spending in that that's not vendor addressable in terms of personnel and overhead. That represents roughly a little over 22% of that total. So the vendor addressable spend here really is $38.1 billion, and that's really pegged to these key priorities around the mission-specific custom applications, the application that helps the IRS run, the applications that helps the Department of Corrections run, the admission systems for a college. These are highly customized opportunities that are in a fragmented landscape. The key for citizen and business self-service to each one of these agencies is an increasing opportunity. And then electronic benefits and payment systems, even though they're delivered separately through a great many agencies, there are a lot of commonalities on the back end that present our vendor community clients with a large opportunity. So what do vendors need to know? Though efficiency and effectiveness are really driving those, it's the lens through which IT makes its investments. It's really looking at these mission-specific initiatives and increasing the efficiency of the business processes and the back-office applications that have been in play or in place for a long time, but that government is finally getting around to addressing. So when we double-click into the total spend and we ask people, by workload category and workload, kind of how their total budgets are being distributed and then how their discretionary spend is being distributed, we get year-to-year guidance as well as share guidance and how their budgets are allocated. And there's really a couple of opportunities that you can see here. One is the professional services opportunities increasing slightly, but represents, for these large public sector institutions, a $7 billion opportunity. And we have greater levels of detail in the workload categories around median budgets and ranges across different service categories, applications development, consulting and advisory services, et cetera, as well as infrastructure spending, which is increasing nearly 2% and largely involves this transition and consolidation of data centers. That's estimated it's going to be $6.3 billion. And then we see the combined kind of systems management and database and middleware space really helping that consolidation of these back-end systems, increasing respectively 1.1% and 3.3% to nearly $10 billion. So there's this majority of the spending here really moving towards things that are in the back end, IT, and the enablement of application delivery. Interestingly, again, we have this reiteration of by the end customers, being a part of government, we have everything planned and have budgets decided for everything 1 year in advance. So we do more fixed spending than discretionary spending. This is from a director this is a line of business director, not an IT director, talking about their budgeting process. So, these long planning cycles really increase the importance on the vendor community to insert yourself at the front end where the exploratory processes are being made, where you get involved in the road mapping for these agencies. And we actually have several case studies around the discretionary spend projects that are top of mind or the highest priority in the public sector space in our full report. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about the average budget. Obviously, these are going to vary agency by agency, but when we looked across all the different entities that we receive data from, this is a walk-up between the 2013 and the 2014 budgets by category. So we see the overall increase in budget, but by category, we see a little bit of a decrease in business applications, but really the two areas where we see the greatest increase is in systems management and infrastructure. So this plays into this consolidation of the data center and the need to put in new systems management software in place to manage and build these cloud or new data center delivery areas. I also mentioned that we, in this research, take a deeper dive and ask people, we have a whole series of workloads that are exemplars inside each one of the workload categories. We ask people to prioritize them and then give us details around the purchasing, where they're at in the purchasing cycle for these key workloads, where they're at, who's in terms of the budgeting for them, how they purchase, who's top of mind from a software vendor point of view to lead that purchase, what the mix of their professional services requests are going to be for this. So these are the key leading edge discretionary projects, and so what we have here are two categories of those priorities. So on the left we have the highest priority, they're in green. These are discretionary spend projects where people are working on doing that mission-specific custom application migration with an average budget of $1.3 million. And then we have the next budget coming through, as we work down the workload categories. We have the tax and revenue systems are incredibly important. Obviously, citizen business self-service and electronic payment systems really are the keys as these work across for the highest priority systems. Then on the other side, you can begin to see how these tie back into the productivity applications, email and messaging, PC operating systems, and again, mission-specific applications. It's the same one. These are the largest budgeted workload areas. So moving forward, how do vendors begin to take advantage of this space? What we find is that vendors just cannot ignore that highly structured purchasing process, but by involving yourself early on with the key initiatives that have an executive sponsorship, you can begin to move outside the standard procurement processes at the early stages where people are looking for sandboxing, when they're looking for the proof of concepts, and that begins to shape the procurement process further down the chain. Obviously, our clients on the call who are deeply embedded in the government business, this is not a net new surprise here, but it's really the key thing is around these new areas of service, the cloud, the mobile consumption, the web services, the use of big data to improve the effectiveness of business really are the key drivers here in the story that can be told by the vendors to help engage with the clients. Helping the public sector entities improve their processes without sacrificing, the cost and security are best positioned. So by cost is like that investment efficiency on the part of the public sector agency. So in this research, we asked people a lot of questions about what's behind their purchasing, how they prioritize their investments. So we talk about the spend increasing for database. This is obviously a key for integrating and consolidating that electronic information. Big data is at foot here, and you can see how people can begin to use that to make the public sector offerings more effective. And in order to actually make those changes and to do the change management and to change the way they operate involves both investments in IT infrastructure and consulting and change management in the business processes to help them get to that and make the promise come true in the operations side. And then, just making the IT more efficient involves taking advantage of cloud and mobility. So the consideration factors there, really tie into cost control, maintaining or increasing security, compliance with regulatory and new government initiatives, making sure that the budgeting is transparent and flexible, because if federal budget spending swings back, there could be some rapid increases in some budget coming up. And then at the end of the list here really is that conversation around migrating, doing the applications modernization around legacy systems. The year-to-year increase isn't huge, but it is tied, it is shifting, as we've shown, around these new cases for and beginning with the data center to begin to make the mission-specific applications more effective. Here's a really good quote I like. Public sector organizations are increasingly driven to improve operational efficiency, share information, and to integrate processes across operational and jurisdictional boundaries while maintaining control over costs, right? So that is a tall order, and a vendor that can begin to open up this conversation with the buyers can really begin, and also to demonstrate competence in these areas, is very strongly positioned to begin to drive the business. So also another piece that we do in this research is to ask questions of people around the character of their purchasing organization. And what was really interesting is that we wound up with a near even split among inside the customer segment around groups, entities, public sector IT entities that are very aggressive in their IT adoption and also share the decision-making power with the non-IT directors and managers. We call those empowered, and they actually have the largest budgets. Now, the other segment are late adopters of IT, which for government means they're very late adopters out of the general population. And they also have very, very centralized IT planning and spending. And that was about another half of the population. So this is really key to beginning that conversation with the agency itself. You need to understand the character of that organization and how they see the use of IT tied to their organization's mission, as well as their perception of, well, gee, how do I get there? You know, do I get there just by using proven technologies? In which case, you need to demonstrate that your technology actually is not bleeding edge. You know, if they're a bureaucrat. If they're empowered, they care less about that, but they also care that their decision makers have all been involved in the process. So a couple of quick questions and engagement with the culture of the buying organization, we find, will help our clients become more effective in the sales cycle. And then understanding the decision-making process and who drives that is another key to making this decision. We find that when you look at this chart, we have kind of bureaucrats at the top. You know, the key decision makers are the engaged, you know, what we call the board of directors, the directors suite, you know, the equivalent of the business C-suite, the federal and municipal leaders, really setting these decisions that are brought to them through a shortlist through IT. So the center of power among bureaucrats is higher up. So target, if your entity that you're selling to is characterized as a bureaucrat, know that you're more than likely your key decision makers are higher up in the organization. Now, the empowered groups, really the key here is that shared identification of the problem at the department level. So they've identified a problem, they're looking for a solution, and the organization itself is empowered to bring those up to the appropriate people. So they function differently. And this quote here in the middle really ties to the empowered teams, right? The IT department or the IT administrative office works on the decision making, but the whole thing starts from the departmental level. First, there's a requirement, and it's put forward to the IT team, which further analyzes how the issue can be addressed. So, you know, this difference in customer character, as we call it, is fairly easy to deduce, but it cuts down on some of the sales cycle legwork that you need to do to help align yourself against their requirements. So let's tie up this presentation and move into the Q&A. You know, we've talked about a couple of key concepts here based on our overall research into large North American public sector entities. We feel that our clients, the IT vendors, can win business by focusing on helping these entities modernize around mission effectiveness. And we've broken out exactly what that means across this broad swath of large IT buyers. We've talked about where the budget is, how it's growing, where it's shifting, and some of the key workload areas that can begin to drive your business. So to remember to take away that, you know, IT is driving this long-term revolution, that public sector entities are looking for applications modernization, data center consolidation, and cloud-based applications to become more effective. And this highly structured purchasing process is open at the lead end around key executives to have executive sponsorship, and that the customer character of the entity that you're selling to plays a huge role in how that deal will unfold. So I want to thank you, and let's open it up for questions and answers.
Great. Thanks to those of you who've sent the questions through now. We are openly soliciting any more questions. So the first one that came through was, did any of the respondents in your budget survey indicate whether they are expecting their budget to contract, and if so, how much?
Yeah, we did have some respondents indicate that they expected their budgets to decrease, just as some actually indicated that they were going to increase. The number that we put forward was the on average number. I'd have to go back and dig through the data to see where the median decrease was on that, but I could share that information with you as a follow-up.
Okay, the next question that came through, do we know what percentage of total agency budget the IT spend represents?
What the percentage of total agency budget the IT spend represents. So each one of the entities that were included in this are of themselves what we're calling large public sector entities. So this isn't just a department, an IT department. They're speaking for the entity that they work for themselves. So they would fall like it's like a large university or a large college or a large public hospital or a large correctional facility, or certainly the federal agencies are included here. So when we are describing their budgets, we're speaking to that entity's IT budget.
Okay. The next question came through. What percentage of spending is actually going into cloud outside of private cloud at the very rudimentary levels like hypervisor virtualization?
That's a very detailed question, so I'm going to give you some data that we have. Actually, in the research we asked people about the processor architectures that they're currently using and which ones they're considering. We also asked people about the consumption models that they're planning for workload categories like BI analytics or database and business applications, their mission applications for their agency. And when we looked at that, the business applications really peaked in private cloud at about 40%. The mission a bit lower than that. And then when we got down into some of the database areas, we saw that really being moved into private clouds. We saw a little bit higher incidence of public clouds being used for productivity areas. But again, in general, the public sector had a lower incidence of using public cloud for productivity space. I think one vendor in particular for public cloud, Amazon, showed up around 11% across all of the different workloads in which they were suitable for being used.
Just to let folks know that I am taking these questions as they're coming in, so there's a few more in queue that we're going to address. Next question that came through, Stuart, I think this is in relation to slide 13, or I'm sorry, 16. Is there a pattern in your cloud spending that maps to the 4 quadrants of the aggressive centralized? I think that maps to what we're looking at now.
Right. So those firms that, agencies, I should say, and entities that are really most closely involved in a transformation project are the ones that are most characterized as the empowered group, right? The aggressive IT adopters. They're looking to bite it off all at once and make the big shift around, hey, we want to tackle a big data project, a transformation project with our data centers, and more of the end citizen engagement projects. That'd be a very aggressive model. We also see some big projects in the conservative bureaucratic side, but that's largely around the data center consolidation and then down the road, we see them road mapping the applications modernization. So there's a difference between those two groups.
Okay. Are you seeing any examples of where the exec sponsor role is actually impacting and changing the procurement processes that are often obstacles to purchasing cloud, shared services, et cetera?
Well, government and procurement office, that's an area that's never going to go away. We do, like I mentioned, we do see that executive sponsorship on key initiatives. So it could be a test bed where the executive has the authority and the sponsorship and probably cover from their elected officials to drive these mandates, right? So they get a mandate to become more efficient and effective from their elected officials. Then they have the cover that they need to be much more bold and aggressive. It also directly ties to the level of funding that they can procure. It's very difficult for the executives to move ahead if they can't align their budgets around a transformational project. So you'll see them doing the test bed, sandboxing, call it what you will, outside in a kind of a discretionary spend, getting a proof of concept there, and then using that to justify the operational efficiencies that will allow them to shift the budgets and then win that budget through the procurement process.
Okay. Do you have any visibility into the size of the shadow IT spend or IT spend that is beyond the formal IT budget?
We do talk about the role, the advisory role of shadow IT here. We talk to people in this research for SourceIT across all the different customer segments. We talk about what's the role of different types of buyers. So with the line of business buyer, the non-IT decision maker. So we're really including them in. We ask them if they're responsible for budget, and if so, what that budget is. Because they share more control over IT budgets these days. So we're really not splitting it into shadow and non-shadow IT. We look at it more holistically and realize that there's going to be, in some groups and agencies, there's going to be purchasing cards or limits where they can go. But the overall trend is towards greater transparency and governance. It's going to be harder to pull that off at any kind of really large scale.
Okay. Did your respondents indicate the decision points they used to determine whether to modernize an application or to wait for a cloud-based alternative?
Since we're looking across the whole, we're looking for the story around what their key priorities are and where they're going with their budgets. We probably have a couple of interviews that talked about their process in those areas, but the focus of the research wasn't to drill down into that level. I think it's a great question since we've uncovered that here, and to be able to open that up as we go down the road with the SourceIT research would be a great follow-up. Okay.
We have time for maybe one question, possibly two. Are there any software vendors that are being considered that surprised you?
Yeah, it was interesting when we looked. We saw Adobe, show up. People are looking for improving productivity from the sense of office work, as well as business process productivity, and the consideration of Adobe for several key workloads was really interesting. But when you think about it, not because of the document management requirements with agencies, everything has to be documented in those giant folders, file folders and paper storage that of days of yore are moving away. So it was interesting. I think it points to a broader requirement around information collection and management.
Okay. Where is the bulk of spend and dependence on systems integrators most prevalent? In the bottom left quadrant of the aggressive centralized? In other words, those in the magic quadrant are more likely to implement their own internal private cloud data center consolidations.
So the capabilities of the IT group inside the entities is a key determinant for whether they're going to use services. We did see a strong utilization of services. We did ask by category. I'm just looking into some of our research here for types of services that are tied to different categories. So when we look at, say, software technology, meaning database and middleware, the three most common types of professional services that we saw being deployed there were applications development and maintenance, systems integration and implementation, and advisory, strategy, or consulting. And the budgets had a very, very broad range on these areas. I mean, the median was well over $1 million, but it ranged, upwards of $50 million for these types of engagements. The vendors that we saw included, IBM, HP, Dell, Infosys, and represent those firms that are top of mind for in these engagements, within the agencies. Obviously, those are just the top ones. Other examples in systems management involved systems integration and implementation, so 40% of the engagements were in that space. 41% were in advisory, and vendors that were in those spaces included IBM, HP, Cognizant, Dell, EMC, and even Oracle to a small extent. So there is a wide array of vendors being represented around the technology here. We did see the traditional large government SIs also show up to a lesser extent, but they were represented. And I think the key for those vendors is that they're really tied to those mission critical. They have the expertise in the mission critical areas instead of just the broad IT platform areas.
Great. Looks like we're at the end of our time, so I want to wrap up. I know there's a couple questions out there that we haven't addressed, so what we're going to do is reach out to you folks individually and follow up with questions. So if anyone out in the audience has additional questions or would like to speak to Stuart more about this research, please feel free to send through a note now, either through chat or the Q&A function, and we'll make sure to take care of that. As Stuart mentioned, there's a couple other SourceIT webinars. We wanted to share those with you in case they're interested in what's happening in some of the other verticals. One vertical he did not mention we've already actually done a webinar on is retail. So if there's additional interest in retail, we have insights into that as well. As promised, here are all these social media links, so you can follow both Stuart and TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here. And while we are going to be sending out the deck to everyone tomorrow, you can also find this deck as well as other decks and, as we said, thought leadership pieces that Stuart and his team are writing, as well as professional services on SlideShare at the URL listed here. Additionally, if you'd like to go back and watch either this presentation, the retail SourceIT presentation, or the ones we'll be recording later in this week and next week, they'll be listed on YouTube at the URL listed here. So we do encourage you guys to engage with us on social media to learn more about what research we're coming out with and to understand better what's happening in your marketplace. As you're signing out, there is a short 3-question survey we're asking everyone to fill out. Basically, it's how good was the presentation, how good was the presenter, and if there's any additional feedback or suggestions on what you guys would like to see as part of this research agenda, we are collecting that feedback and incorporating it into what we're doing from quarter to quarter. So please do take the time to fill that out. As I mentioned, I'm going to keep the chat function open for another couple of minutes just in case there's any last-minute follow-ups. And if we don't hear from you, we look forward to hearing from you guys all going forward as we continue to develop our research agenda. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.